like what it is today, which is not an easy place to work, but also not one in which, on a constant basis, you have to worry about, mortal danger.
Mm-hmm. Given all the stories that you've written about and covered for time, what was it about Ronald Reagan's Brandenburg Gate speech that merits this book?
Well, a few things. First of all, I wanted to write a book about an event that I lived through and that shaped me and my generation. And in thinking about my life, I'm 34 years old. The fall of the Berlin Wall really was the signal-defining world historical event before 9/11, and one I distinctly remember watching on television and discussing at the time. I also have always been interested in presidents and the presidency, and in particular the power and the significance of presidential oratory, presidential speech-making. And as a writer and an editor, I'm fascinated with words and the power of words and how words can inspire people to do things and why certain words resonate more than others. And as a result, I found myself thinking more and more about this particular speech and that particular line, "Tear down this wall," which is so resonant, and yet I think I didn't know much of the story behind the speech when I set out to write the book, and I felt that most Americans probably don't know the story of this speech and the context in which it was delivered. And so those were all the reasons why I was attracted to this subject and found myself, as I got deeper into it, discovering that there really is a great story here.
Mm-hmm. Even when the speech was given, it didn't really grab the headlines, did it?
No, it was, it was given in June of 1987. Obviously, the twilight of Ronald Reagan's presidency. In some ways, he was a damaged president, a wounded president. He had come through Iran-Contra. His poll ratings were much lower than they had been even 6 months before. And he was being criticized, something we forget now, that he was being criticized on both the left and the right for the policies he was pursuing. On the left, there was a view of Reagan still as a sort of Cold Warrior, hardline, militaristic figure. And on the right, there was a lot of skepticism about the overtures he was making toward Gorbachev, and some fears that people on conservatives had that he was going too far, and that he was being taken for a ride by this charismatic young leader in the Soviet Union. So as a result, some of the things that he was doing, I think, were not fully appreciated at the time. And when he goes to Berlin to give this speech, although it was covered, and all three nightly newscasts, for instance, led with coverage of this speech that he gave, it sort of came and went, as things do. And I think, as I say in the book, if you asked most Americans, even a year after the speech, if they remembered anything about it or if they even recognized that line, they probably would not tell you that they did. And now today, if you poll most Americans, they probably would say, yes, that line sounds familiar, and they would be able to identify it.
Of course, we look back now with hindsight, and we see how many pieces fit together. They all culminated to make that moment happen, but it wasn't so obvious then, was it?
No, I mean, when Reagan went to Berlin, it was obviously still divided, East and West. There was very little sign that most outsiders had that the tide of democracy and opposition to communism in Eastern Europe was taking hold. And so most people believed that the Berlin Wall would continue to stand for a generation. In fact, Erich Honecker, the leader of East Germany, said not long after Ronald Reagan's speech, the Berlin Wall will be here for 100 years. What we now know is that in many parts of Eastern Europe, there were stirrings of change, and there were signs that people were ready to stand up and throw off the yoke of communist rule. And a lot of that was started and precipitated by the